There we go.
All right. Good evening and welcome to Beginners Academy. We have a talk about every other week for beginners and hams returning to the hobby. And tonight, our talk is Beginner's Guide to Powerpole Connectors. I'm Greg Lane, N4KGL. And some of the slides I borrowed from the Southern Pennsylvania Radio Club, K3IR. So why Powerpole your world? Okay. Well, these days, mobile and base amateur radios are predominantly powered by 12 volts direct current, DC. Therefore, the power supply is not in the radio, it's separate. Your power supply or the battery is separate from your radio. So it's helpful to have a convenient way to connect and disconnect your radio from the power source. And there are many ways to get this job done. But Powerpoles are now a popular choice and are the standard for most ARES groups. When I talk about Powerpoles, I'm referring to the Anderson Powerpole, and that is a family of electrical connectors by Anderson Power Products. Okay, some of the pros are connections can be very quick. The connectors themselves are genderless. They're easy to assemble. The same housing works for 15, 30, and 45 amps. And power poles seem like they're becoming a ham standard. They're not perfect though. Power poles aren't waterproof, and they do stick together fairly well, but they don't latch. So if you don't want them to pull apart, you'll have to do something extra. Of course, they don't pull apart by themselves. All right, here's the power pole components. There are the plastic housing, which there's a red one and a black one. There are different other colors available. And then the little metal inserts are, are usually crimped to your wires, and they're inserted into the housing. And we'll get to those details later. And the little X down there is for a little push pin to lock two connectors together. Most people don't like those because being a metal pin, if it fell out in your radio or somewhere, it could cause a problem. So it turns out it's not all that necessary anyway. And we're going to admit Frank and Chad. All right. All right, guys, we're doing our PowerPoint presentation, continuing on here. All right, well, the power poles are genderless in that you don't need the male. It's both sexes essentially. So you don't need a special plug and a special socket. The same housings do the same job. In this picture, they're just flipped over. So they're usually set up in pairs, as you can see right here. Well, you can't see this unless you cut your housing in half, but this is a view of the internals of the housing with a the little insert pushed in. So there's essentially a spring inside the housing, and when you push in, I'm just calling it the insert, attached to the wire, it's going to slip over that spring. And that's part of the magic of the power poles. And we'll get into more details as we go. So this pair of connectors, you've got your positive and negative for your DC supply, let's say. Well, there's a particular way to put the pair together that's standardized. And so when viewed from the contact side, opposite the wiring side, with the tongue down and hood up, the red is on the left and the black is on the right. So now I usually am looking at it from the wiring side, and in that case, I'd want my red connector for the positive to be on the right side. So we always want to be careful about the polarity. So give this some thought before you start making your power poles. All right, well, the power poles are versatile in the sense that they'll work with different wire sizes. And that's why there's 3 different metal inserts. One is for up to 15 amps. And it can handle 20, 18, and 16 gauge wire. 30 amp, which is what you might use for your power supply, can handle 14 and 12 gauge wire. And then 45, well, the 45 amp version will handle 10 gauge. So if you were, when you purchase these, you need to consider what wire sizes you're going to use, or you might buy a kit that has all 3 in it. I don't have it. Okay. All right. Well, I found these instructions for assembling a power pole connector. Number 1, you're going to put the 2 housings together, okay, and they dovetail, so you slide them together. And you can use some glue to make sure they stay together. They're really going to stay together pretty much by friction. You can also purchase the housing in red-black pairs where they're already joined, and I've done that. So number 3, strip the wires. Number 4, orient the wires. Number 5, crimp the connectors. And insert, I was calling these inserts, but insert the connectors until they click into the housing. So it's a good feeling when you hear the click. You might not.
Uh-oh.
But when I started making these, they looked like they were done, but the connector would pull out, the insert would pull out. So you always want to tug to test. So we have a little video that will make this more clear. But definitely tug on the wires to make sure that they won't pull out of the housing, because if they didn't, quote, click or go far enough in the housing, they'll just pull right out. This is the tool I use. It's called a Tri-Crimp from West Mountain. It does handle all three sizes of the inserts, metal inserts, and it's it's used to make the connection between the wire and the insert. So we're going to watch a video by W2AEW, and here we go.
This is just a quick video to show how to install these Anderson Powerpole connectors onto the end of some wire. So first we'll start off by stripping the wire back. You've got to strip it back about 3/8 of an inch, and it's always a good idea to use some kind of an adjustable wire stripper like this one here, so that you don't nick the wire that you might be trying to do here. I'm going to probably have to do this off camera, because I may not be able to get enough room on camera here to do this, but I'm just rotating this around kind of gently as I squeeze the handles, and then we should be able to pull off that insulation there. Let's see. There we go. So we got a nice strip there without taking any of the wires off. And then I usually like to also put a little bit of a twist on that. That helps keep all the strands together. So when we slip it into the contact there, it'll go in there. So let me strip the other one off here and we'll come back on video. Okay, with both the wires stripped and a little twist put in them, before we connect or slide on the contacts here and crimp them, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of orientation. These Powerpole connectors are nice. These little plastic shrouds have got some features that allow you to couple them together. You can see a little bit of an indentation or groove on this side. You can see a little protrusion, okay, on that side of them, and they look like just rectangular, slots, but really they're dovetails. And what that allows you to do is slide them together. So if we take, and let me see if I orient this the right way here, might be able to see. So if we orient the slot of this black one along with the protrusion on the red one here, we can slide them together, and you can see how they kind of stay together and slide them together like that. And that kind of keeps them together. And you can kind of orient them a couple of different ways, but some of the amateur radio groups and emergency response groups have adopted this orientation, with the hoods kind of going over the top, the red one being on the left and the black one being on the right. And if you make all of your cable assemblies this way, whether you're hooking up to batteries or hooking up to radios, if you follow this same convention, it'll make it easier for you to connect up radios to power cords and things like that without having to worry about whether you've cross-polarized them. So with that orientation in mind, we'll use that when we put the terminals on the ends of the wire. So when these terminals slide into the back of the connectors, they kind of go in this orientation. You can see the connector here has got a little bit of a downturn on it. It slides into the back of the connector this way and really hooks over that little metal spring that you might be able to see just inside that connector. So when we go to put these then on the wires, we want to be sure that we're going to have that right orientation on the wires here as well. So on the black one, which is going to be our negative, we want to make sure that we put that one on that way and crimp it down that way. And then the red one will do the same thing. Make sure that those kind of hooks are pointing down. Okay, so just like that. So we'll crimp those on in that orientation, so that once they're crimped on and we slip them into the housing, they'll be in the right orientation. So let's go and talk about crimping. So in crimping those wires, you really want to have the right tool. There are lots of inexpensive crimping tools that are out there, and they'll have different profiles in terms of what the die look like, or the ends look like, that are going to actually do the crimp. And if you're just putting little ring terminals on wires and things like that, you can kind of use whatever you want. But for these power pole connections, it really does pay to get one of the crimping tools that is designed for it. Mainly because there's a pretty tight clearance inside that housing, and you want to be sure that you don't have to distort the terminal in any way to get it into that housing. So this one is Tri-Crimp by West Mountain Radio. It's a nice tool. There are different dies available for this, so you can put different dies in to do different types of terminals. So we'll use this to make that connection. It's a ratcheting type tool. So what will happen is, as you crimp down, you can hear it ratcheting. Okay, and the idea is that what you'll do is you'll crimp it down until that latch finally releases. You can hear it like that, and then you can let go. The important thing is not to squeeze it past that point where the latch releases, because you could potentially break the die when you do that. So let's get ready to crimp one of those wires. It's kind of tough to do this on camera, but let's see if we can do this the right way. So I've got this oriented the right way, because this will slip into this housing, the correct orientation. And the way you use this connector, this is a 30 amp connector, so that's going to go into the middle die here. And so we'll slip that in and then cramp down on it. So I'm going to pull the other wire up out of the way here. Okay, and position. See if I can do this so you can actually see it on camera here. It's kind of tough to watch two things at once. So I'm going to slip this inside here. Okay, and then crimp down on that. And let me get both hands on here. Okay, and we'll just watch that little lever down here. You'll actually see when it releases. Okay, so it just released, so now I'm fully crimped. We'll let this thing go, and now let's take a close look at that connection. You can actually see a really nice crimp to that, no bellowing out, a nice crimp at the back of it in there, and that's what a proper crimp should look like on these power pole terminals. But I've gone ahead and crimped the other terminal here, so both of these are now ready to go. Now let me bring up the topic of soldering. A lot of people will like to then also solder these connections in place to kind of solidify that even further. And there's two schools of thought there. The one school of thought obviously is that a soldered connection here is going to be solid. It's going to be much less likely to loosen up and that kind of thing. So a nice thing to do, and there's some good reasons for soldering, and I will sometimes do that. But the other school of thought is when you solder, the solder will wick down into kind of the stranded conductors here, and then where the solder ends, you wind up creating kind of a bending point, because the soldered wire will be very stiff, the stranded wire won't be. And as a result, you'll get a point there that any stress that gets put on this terminal is going to create like a fracture line, or could potentially create a fracture right where the solder ends. Crimp connections, when they're done properly, are very reliable, so I'll oftentimes not solder them. If I'm going to go into a situation where I know the wires are never going to be bent or dressed or things like that, I'll solder them sometimes. But for what I'm doing here, just the crimp connection is going to be enough. So let's take care of inserting these into the plastic housings. Okay, these are ready to go inside the plastic housing with the curves kind of pointing down. We'll take the housings in this orientation like this with the hood over the top, and we can slip both of these in here, and you push them until you hear them click, and sometimes it can take quite a bit of force, especially if you're doing two at once. Sometimes I'll put a little screwdriver in the back. I just heard the red one click in there, so now I just have to get the black one oriented right and get that one in place. And let's see, I might have to kind of play with this a little bit to kind of get that in place. And we'll just do that off. Oh, there it goes. And push that in place, and now that clicked in place. So now both of those are in there. They're not going to come out, and we've now completed the power pole connection. Now there is a little hole here. Some of the suppliers will give you a little roll pin you can stick in there to try to keep these from potentially sliding apart. But I've never had a problem with them sliding apart, so I typically don't put those roll pins in. To me, it's just an extra piece of metal that might fall out at some point and short things out, so I leave the roll pins out. Some people will also backfill with some hot melt glue or some caulk or things like that to create a little bit of a strain relief where the wires go in. And that's probably a pretty good idea, especially if you solder the connections. If you don't solder them, it's probably unnecessary. So I hope you found this video useful to see how to assemble these Powerpole connectors. Again, really convenient, nice, reliable connectors to use on portable electronic equipment. Thanks again for watching.
Okay. Are there any questions about the video or anything we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I got a question.
Okay.
Actually, it's kind of a complaint. If you go back to like the third or fourth slide where they're showing the 15 and the 30 and the 45, you'll notice, yeah, back up right there, hold it right there. The National Electrical Institute, the NEI or IE, whatever their name is, has said for, I don't know how many years, 50 or 100 years, a 12 gauge wire is safe up to 20 amps. Where do they get off saying you can use 30 amps? And a 14 gauge wire is only good for 15 amps, according to the National Electrical Code.
Well, I guess the little metal insert's good for 30 amps, but you'll have to size your wires appropriately. Yes.
Yeah, so you need to stick with the 45 just to be safe on like a 100-watt radio that draws 22 amps. Well, you might be okay because 12 gauge for 20 amps, you might be okay.
I think
you'd be running it to the limit though. I don't know why. I don't know how they get away with this. I actually questioned. It was about 4 or 5 years ago at the Orlando Hamfest. They had a booth, and I came up and questioned them, and they would not answer the question. They just absolutely refused to answer the question.
Well, actually, the way I've been doing it is I've just been using the insert that the wire best fits in. So
yeah, I use whatever's in the scrap pile there.
Yeah.
I'll use twice as many 30s as I do the 15s, so because I'll double or triple up the smaller wire on that 30 amp because I don't know. I just have more uses for the 30 amp size than I ever did the 15. Yeah. I got a bunch of those laying around.
Actually, if I could say something.
No.
Go ahead, Frank.
You size a wire thicker, not because you're going to carry a lot of amps. You want to size it so you don't have loss in long run. So if you're going to run a wire to the back of your car and you're only going to pull 20 amps, you might want to consider running like a number 8. Because in DC, you're going to have a lot of voltage drop in that long of a run. So you don't put a big wire on there to carry that much amps.
Yeah.
You put it there so you don't have a lot of drop in the voltage.
Well, yeah. Well, you may not want to use Powerpoles then.
Yeah, but they make Powerpoles.
Oh, they do. They make larger ones.
We've got a forklift at church that uses 100 amp Powerpole.
Yeah, this isn't the limit of Powerpoles. So you could use the larger, there's even like 100 amp Powerpole. Anderson Powerpoles makes them up to very large sizes if you needed that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay. All right. Well, well, you can hook up your power supply and your radio, but Powerpoles are just showing up on a lot of accessories. Obviously, I haven't covered all accessories, but on the left is a power supply that has a power pole output. So the newer equipment is coming out with power poles already on it. And then to the right there is a DC distribution panel, and it's all Powerpoles. Now, MFJ makes a distribution panel that uses binding post and whatever, but they also make them for Powerpoles. And I've got a essentially extension cable at the bottom. You can buy cables and adapters that already have the Powerpoles on them, or you can have your own spool of wire and make up the cables yourself. So if your power supply doesn't have a Powerpole output on it, you can use something like this to go from its binding post, let's say, to a Powerpole. You may not need the fuses. That would be up to you. So this is a way to make your power supply Powerpole compatible. So where can you get Powerpoles? The answer is really everywhere, as all the sources for ham radio. In particular, PowerWorks. That's a good site to look at for all the different, the housings, the pins, assortment kits, the accessories, the adapters are all on PowerWorks. Now it turns out you can save on shipping by getting your PowerWorks stuff through HRO or Gigaparts, and maybe you'll combine it with something else, so you get free shipping for $100 or more. Of course, eBay, a lot of the ham sellers sell Powerpoles and then made up adapters and so forth. Hamfest vendors, I think Quicksilver will be at Huntsville. They sell Powerpoles and many more. So there's no lack of sources for these little parts.
Yeah, let me say something else here.
Okay.
A lot of these Powerpoles are made in China, and it's bad news if you get some of them. I've had experience with them. They're not worth it. If you come across them for sale for like 50 cents each or something, you just wasting your money. The average price is going to be $1 or more per Powerpole. Yeah. If it's a real made in USA piece of equipment, you buy this Chinese stuff, you're going to be sorry. Let me tell you, they just don't hold up.
All right. Well, that's a good point. Okay. So the point of the video is to, for new hams and returning hams, consider Powerpoles for your shack, your mobile, and your go box. They're not the answer for everything, but they're pretty convenient. So when you get a brand new radio, if you have your Powerpoles ready, or you go see a friend and put a Powerpole connector, because ICOM doesn't put Powerpoles on their power cable for their radios. And based on your needs, maybe you have been using something else and you can convert. But, you know, if you like what you're doing, you can stick with it. And there are other ways to connect and particularly if you're going for waterproof, you probably want to use something else.
You want to mention that we have these at the clubhouse?
I'm glad you did.
Well, I mean, we have the whole kit up there. If you need to just make one cable, you don't have to go out and spend $45 for a pair of pliers and another $10 or $15 for a kit thing. We have those at the clubhouse, and I think, what do you charge, like $1 each or something, which is very reasonable.
Yeah.
If you just need to make a cable,
yeah,
show up on Wednesday night and somebody there will show you how to do it.
That's a very good point. All righty. Well, that's the end of my slides. So any other questions or comments about Powerpoles?
Well, thank you, Greg.
Well, you're welcome.
Hey, Greg,
Yes.
I just want to mention, you know, when you buy a radio, it comes with a real large and kind of clumsy cable with fuses and all that. You know, in me sense, I try to get my radios as compact as I can make them. What I've done is I've taken that 6-pin connector that's in the back of the radio, and this Anderson Powerpole will just slide in there real tight. The slot, and then I put an internal fuse, so it's fuse protected, and I can just plug right in here. And I put a little mini fuse inside, and that way you don't mess around with a big bulky cable that the radio comes with. And this is a 71. I mean FT91 891, and I make the brackets like that, put on it to protect it. But I try to make it so you can just carry the radio with no bulkiness hanging from it.
Right. If you're in a go box, you don't need 10 feet of cable.
Right?
So Frank, those radios usually have like a 6-pin Molex connector or something. Does the power pole fit in the same square hole? Do you have to glue it in, Frank, or how do you secure it?
When you take the one that's in there out, you just press it and it pushes in.
Right.
And on this radio, internally they're not soldered in. There's little screws. You can take the terminals off, squeeze it, and it pops right in. And you can save that. You can always put it back.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you slide this in, these little slots here, one on each side, and then one on this side, it'll just go. You put it in the middle, and you slide it one way, and it catches in these little grooves here.
Oh.
Then all you need to do is put something in there so it doesn't slide down. Cool. You don't have to glue it or nothing. It'll hold in there on the groove.
Interesting.
Another thing, see, I make these things up. You can buy these, but I made mine. And, you know, I mean, I might have a 20-amp power supply, but I want to run a bunch of different radios, and I'm not going to be using them all at the same time. So I can hook them up, you know, like this. I made this up. You snap them all together, and this cover here is kind of like the cover that comes on the cable that comes with the radios. And I have a lot of old cables and stuff. So I just slid. I heated it up and I just slid it over the whole thing when I was done. Nice. So you can just like if you have one of those lithium-ion batteries that come with this, you can put that in there and you can, you know, hook it to a very multitude of different things like that.
All right. Thanks, Frank. All right. Well, thanks for your attention. And I think it was W2AEW did an excellent video that was very informative. And so we'll wind this one up. And we encourage you to watch our other videos that we've got on the W4RYZ YouTube channel. All right, 73.